lot of people who've helped me do the research. You'll see some people from Waco, Texas, and you'll get to see why that reference comes up. And also I had some very good help from Richard Shanahan, a local architect, and I'll explain all that. And of course, the Extreme History Project for having us here. And here's our building. This is what we're looking at. It's, you know, it's on the hill, it's strikingly visible from I-90, and that's where I'm standing right now. So in looking at this building, I typically start with the larger context, and then I get more into specifics. So I always thought this building was from the mid-60s, and like to think that I know a lot about mid-century modern architecture, right? Well, I did find that modern buildings extend much further than the 60s, and that this building was built in 1978. But it does fit neatly in with the modern era in a national sense. So it's not that we were behind the times by any means. Don't worry, this is not going to be a lecture about modern architecture, but I do want to give you a little bit of context here. And granted, this is a quote from 1958, so it's probably when Henry Russell Hitchcock was a little close, too close to modern to really view it in an unbiased fashion. But we still have this general approach about modern, that it's very hard to categorize a lot of the buildings. And are they international, organic, functional? And really the deal is that there are a fair number of different types of modern buildings. We're going to be looking at what's called the second wave of modern. The first wave was begun essentially in 1923 with the international style, moved on to the streamlined modern, Art Deco, and something called stripped classical. We're not going to review that first wave at all. And we're going to try and be unbiased about it. We take up an approach generally, which is what the General Services Administration has taken. They've categorized modern buildings into 4 pretty predominant, commonly accepted second wave styles. The first of which is the international style. And you can see I'm trying to use examples from Montana. And I do have some examples from Bozeman as well. And this is actually an interesting style because the international style, as I said, was part of the first wave. It continued on through the second wave. And the first wave was essentially the 1920s through the end of the 1940s. The second wave is the 1950s through the 1970s, sometimes squeaks into 1980, which ends up being simultaneous with the postmodern style. That's not unusual at all to have that kind of overlap. When you look at styles from the 1890s and you see, you know, Queen Anne overlapping Italianate, that's what happens. And this is what happened in this sense. And actually postmodern started, I don't know, they say it started 1966. We don't really see much of it very strongly until the 1980s. But we see the international style from the 50s through the 70s. And the deal with the international style is it's very stripped down. They're usually large rectilinear forms, such as this one, horizontal ribbon windows, and they're often framed just like the ones you see here. The structure is expressed. You can see where the columns are easily from the exterior of the building. There are cantilevered extensions, such as the entry roof here, and usually smooth wall planes. And you'll see the building, the entry and the first floor are at grade. We've moved away from the monumental steps that go up to the main level, like you see on our Carnegie Library, like you see on at our state capitol building. So that's one thing you do see about a lot of the modern buildings. You enter pretty much at grade. You might have a step or two to rise up, and that's pretty much it. But no grand monumental stairway anymore. This building, by the way, is listed in the National Register of Historic Places. Quite a few of the buildings we show will be. Oh, did I go the wrong direction? Excuse me. And here's a sweet little building from Sydney. And I can't show a current photograph, unfortunately, because this building has just been subsumed by all sorts of additions around it. You can barely glimpse one single bay of it. But this is a building that the GSA is actually quite proud of. And they have a book about modernism. And they actually have a photo of the Sydney Northern Plains building. And this is, I know it's a pretty crappy resolution, but it really gives you a pretty good idea of this box-shaped international style building. This was, as it shows on the slide, built in 1965. And this actually is part of GSA's Guiding Principles for Architecture program. That was a 10-year program, not as solid as the Mission 66 program that the Park Service had, but this was guided by Kennedy, essentially. He really wanted to promote guiding principles for federal architecture. What should federal architecture look like? It should be energy efficient. It should be modern. And what does that mean? And it should be regional. So it impacted commercial architecture as well. So you'll hear me reference GSA's principles, but that's partly because it did spread to the commercial sector as well. And a lot of the architects working in the commercial sector worked for the federal government as well in terms of designing buildings. And so here we have another international style building, expansive windows, a lot of glass. You can really read the structure of this building with a very regular columnar structure and smooth wall surfaces. And here's a building listed in the National Register. A lot of people are appalled at this. This is our federal building here in Bozeman. It's a very simple form of what's called formalism, which is also referred to as neo-formalism and new formalism. And it's right here in Bozeman, built in 1966. Norman Hamill was actually quite a prolific architect here in Bozeman. You see a very formal geometry. There's a lot of precast concrete in this, and so you could lift that up on cranes very easily, which were starting to be used in the mid-50s on, and so you could actually prefabricate and install that fairly quickly. It's a simple volume. You do see the projected entry of roof above the entry and a very formal rhythm, and in this case as well, the structure is very easily identifiable. Now here's another part of the second wave that we really don't have a whole lot of in Montana, so I kind of struggle with finding that, but the iconic image in the upper left is the Boston City Hall, and from 1968. Now brutalism is not meant to be a brutal building, but it was actually, I won't go into the naming of it, but it's typically something it's a very weighty structure, even though it's quite penetrable, and you see a lot of interpenetration between solids and voids, and the windows are all real punched holes into the building. There are a lot of these buildings of the brutalism style are of concrete, and you can read the wood form structure on the concrete, and that's actually part of its ornament, the texture of the material. So these are weighty buildings. They're often pretty rough, but they're always very stable. And that's very good for a government type building. And they do allow, as you can see, they're really quite porous. And so in some ways, they're very inviting. And the closest example that we have in Montana is a much later time period. It's from 1980. As I said, we're really kind of moving out of modernism at that point, but it's the State Library in Helena. And we have to show that what's called Googie. It's a subset of Expressionism, and unfortunately, we lost this building. But Ozzie Berg was one of our quite prolific architects during the modern era in Bozeman and throughout Montana. He did a lot of schools and the Brick Breeden Fieldhouse. But this is actually named after a Googie drive-in in Los Angeles. And it's, as I said, it's a subset of Expressionism. But now we'll go back to focus on formalism, because when we look at the life of a Montana building, we see something that's very formal and really is actually part of the formalism style. And one of the epitomes of that style was actually as late as 1972, the Paul Rogers Federal Building, which is in West Palm Beach. And so you'll start to see that some of these modern buildings, even though the guiding principles really wanted a lot of them to be regional, they could be plopped down almost anywhere. You could almost have this in Bozeman, except for the scale of it. But the designs tend to be fairly national as opposed to regional. They did have regional architects design a number of these buildings. And sometimes if you look very closely, it's the specific materials themselves, whether it's the aggregate and the concrete or the type of marble that's used in the lobbies. So they did try to be regional in that sense. That's kind of as close as they could get. But this style endured a long time, and this was through the late 70s into the early 80s for both government and commercial buildings. And this building was designed by a firm called Stetson and Spina, and I don't know a whole lot about them, but this is really considered one of the prototypes of the new formalism style. And you can see it's very symmetrical, and you can definitely read the structure here. The skyline is quite level. That parapet just goes straight across, and it often, as this one has, is a pretty heavy projecting roof slab. The wall surfaces are typically fairly smooth, whether it's glass or a smooth concrete. Certainly the columns typically were very smooth. And the columnar support is a little heftier than we saw on earlier international styles. And I apologize for not pointing that out, but we often have very pronounced capitals, and you can see this wonderful swelling for the capital at the top of the building, and we have defined bases. So, yeah, I guess we're cut off by a bit of me, but you can see that this is very much a formalist style building with that heavy projecting roof line. It's a flat roof, and the columns are fairly substantial, and they swell up to a beautiful capital. And it's a single block of a building, just like most formalism buildings of that style are, and it's a very strict symmetry. And you can see some wonderful, very subtle detailing with the smooth columns, which are actually plastered. What did Dick Shanahan say? 7 or 8 plasterers, these old guys in their 70s from South Dakota, came to do the plastering on these columns. And the wall structure behind it, or the wall surface behind it, is a precast concrete with ribbed, wonderful ribbed texture, and you can see the aggregate. It's a varied aggregate. It's really quite lovely, and it contrasts, that roughness contrasts with the smooth glass and the smooth on the column capitals. There's a close-up of that column capital, really lovely, just a beautiful flaring, and obviously it's intended to say, I'm supporting this big, heavy roof slab. So where does all this, your whole lecture about modernism is over, and that's kind of the context. And so now let's get into the real specifics of the Life of Montana building, which means we need to talk about the Life of Montana company. And this is, you start going through the Polk directory, and you try and find out where they were, who's part of them. And there's a name we see here, Herb Richards, as the president. And we see that it was formerly known as the Gallatin National Life Insurance Company. This is the 1971 directory, the year after Herb Richards became president, and after he renamed the building. Herb was the big man in front of this company, and he led a lot of change and growth for this company so that it became the largest insurance company in Montana, and bought a number of other insurance companies throughout Montana. But it was started here in Bozeman at 27 North Tracy as the Gallatin National Life Insurance Company. And when Herb became president in 1970, he utilized a lot of what he'd learned since 1953 when he became a local insurance agent here. So he'd been in this game quite a while. His involvement was also reflected in the renaming of the building, or of the company, where he wanted it to be a statewide company. So he's calling it the Life of Montana Insurance Company. But really, this is more than a name change. This was when he started consolidating with other companies and merging with other companies. He took advantage of a new Montana legislation that allowed Montana firms to bring other resources into the state. So he was able early on to consolidate with the Insurance Investment Corporation of, let's see, what is it, Oklahoma City, and with the Equity National Life Insurance Company of Phoenix. So he was pushing a big move to change the company from assets of $980,000 in 1970 to $4.5 million in 1976 to $40 million in 1983. This is a lot of growth pretty quickly, and all here in Bozeman. And this is where they started, at the 27 North Tracy building. in the Gallatin National Life Insurance Company, right here. This building has seen a fair amount of changes over the years. It doesn't show up until on the Sanborns until 1912, and then it shows that it was used for an agricultural implement storage, and then as a bus station and auto storage, and then it was a creamery, and then in 1971 through 1974, is that right? Yes, was the Life of Montana Insurance Company building. And you can see the ETHA, this was an earlier photo, the ETHA hotel rising up from the armory in the background there. So, and there's Herb Richards right before your very eyes, a big notice of him, president of the purchasing firm. The Life of Montana has purchased the Transwestern Life Insurance Company out of Billings. They bought 89% of it. And he was at the forefront of this action. He combined and managed this from the Bozeman headquarters. And he's expanding even more. This is showing a new Great Falls office, which opened in 1978. And in 1977, they purchased the Glacier Life Insurance Company of Kalispell. And of course, almost everything in this, I mean, his story promotes controversy, because another firm had been trying to buy Glacier Life, and they actually sued. And it was ended up being settled out of court, but they had been trying to buy the company, and their story was that Herb Richards swept it out from under them. We don't know that that's the case, and it was settled out of court, so we don't have any more information than that. But note also the logo here. I've always had a little trouble reading this, but it's LOMIC, and it was designed by the students at MSU's School of Art Industrial Design program. So you'll see that on a number of these images here. This is when they're expanding outside of the state. This is in 1981 when they opened an office in Rapid City, South Dakota. Now, they also had other investments, as a lot of insurance companies do, and they invested in real estate. And I don't know if any of you have been up to Seeley Lake to the Double Arrow Ranch. It's just a lovely, lovely place. So, but apparently Herb had bought 770 acres of the Double Arrow Ranch in the early 70s. He wrapped it up into the Life of Montana Development Company, and he subdivided the property into 266 home lots. He restored the lodge, which is currently listed in the National Register of Historic Places. We saw that nomination about 5 or 6 years ago. He sold the property in 1977 to a limited partnership that developed it as a resort. There's a golf course there and a tennis courts, a pool, and it's really a lovely spot with condos as well. So this was part of the investment. Someone indicated that it might have been a tax shelter for the company. And in order to accommodate all this growth, the Life of Montana building needed a larger, Life of Montana company needed a larger building. So they entered into a series of land swaps with the city of Bozeman. They had some land by the cemetery, and they swapped it for 12.5 acres next to the city softball field, which some of you may know. I mean, it's still there as a softball field. And we're here at 601 Haggerty Lane. So they did this swap of land in 1977 so that Life of Montana could build on the hill there. But the city held this project hostage for a few months because they wanted a swap for a downtown parking lot on property that the Life of Montana owned. It was only after that swap that Life of Montana was able to get this property on Haggerty Lane. The city was fairly heavily involved with it, negotiating with Herb Richards. And in December 1977, they approved of a low interest tax-free revenue bond to the Life of Montana for $100,000. And it saved the company $100,000. Yet what it meant was that the city technically owned the building until the loan was paid off 20 years later. And so it was actually paid off by the current owner who bought the property in 1990, or he leased the property in 1990 with an option to purchase. And this is the site that the city held hostage for a little while. This is the 28 North Black site where the Life of Montana company was from 1974 till 1978 when they moved into their current building. Life of Montana sold this property to the city for a parking lot. They were very short on parking, and they were keen to get more parking. So this was part of the trade. And what Herb Richards said was, if this trade did not go through, that the Life of Montana company would relocate to Billings, where they already had that Transwestern building. So there was a little bit of, obviously, political negotiation going on here, and threats, hopefully empty, but the land swap went through. And this is a building that used to be at, went too fast, sorry. I'm going the wrong way. Oh, sneak previews all around. This is a building that was at that 28 North Black site, and it has a pretty interesting history just by looking at the Sanborn maps. It's a two-story structure that faces Black, but it had a long series of one-story buildings behind it that over the years since 1884 were either lodging or known as a tenement. For a while it was known as a boarding house. It never said female boarding house, so we think it was not a house of ill repute, but it did ultimately end up being a clinic. And some of the people that I remember running into some people at at the Gallatin History Museum who remembered going to this clinic building. And you can see it's really a lovely neoclassical building, and it was stuccoed sometime between 1904 and 1912, probably to give it a very even appearance. And this is the day it was moved. So as I said, the city wanted the site for a parking lot, and they ended up moving the building to some site east of town on Main Street. So where is this? The whole idea is to free it up for parking, but take a look at the fan light and side lights in that circled area. And you can see them in this building here. Here they're circled, and obviously they've taken off a lot of the stucco, and you can see that there was clapboarding behind it originally. So it's actually quite a great evidentiary photograph to be able to kind of tell the history of the building. I'm trying to move it. Okay, I've gotten stuck. Okay, you'll have to bear with me a little bit. Let me see what I can do here. Okay, sorry guys. I may have to start it over. I think I'll just do that real quickly.
That's a good idea, Leslie. Just maybe start over, and
okay.
I'm not sure why you would have gotten stuck, but it happens.
It does. So, okay, it's a virtual life. All right, so and what we can do from the current slide, maybe that'll do it. Yes, great. This is the building now. And it's a building that we all drive by. We all don't notice, but it's at 1315 East Main. And it was just sort of, I don't know if someone told me to look there, but I just knew it was at the east end of town. And I started looking around, and then I looked a little closer, and you can see the fan light, the side lights, and it's re-stuccoed now, but all the windows line up in the right place when you compare it to the photo of the move and to the clinic building. So it's really kind of exciting to find its actual relocation. And it's not that far from the Life of Montana building. The Life of Montana building is just up the hill from here. This is actually at the intersection of Main and Highland. And if you take Highland up and then you'll take a little left onto Haggerty, you'll get up there to the Life of Montana building. So that's all pretty exciting, right? Oh, let's see, do I have to do that now? Oh, there we go. Okay, so let's get back to our Life of Montana building. The groundbreaking took place on April 24th, 1978, and you can see that the governor was going to be there, other state officials. This is really considered a pretty big deal. It was going to be 18,900 square feet per floor. It was going to have a basement, and they do talk about where it's located on Haggerty Lane, and it said it was 2 stories high and had a full basement. Now, I should never neglect to mention the contractor. It was Wayne Edsel of Edsel Construction, and the construction cost was $2.75 million. But what was the design inspiration for this? Herb Richards had said that he styled the building after some building that he knew of in Texas somewhere. And apparently he did go down to Waco, Texas and look at this Waco Savings and Loan. It's no longer the Savings and Loan, it's BBVN something. It's changed hands a few times. But does this building look familiar to you? This building was finished in 1975 per the designs of, as they say, Wacoan architectural firm, Bennett, Carnahan, Hearn, and Thomas. And Thomas is circled on the right. He's actually the sole survivor of this firm. I mean, he's in his 80s now, and I have not yet reached out to him. I do need to do that. But this was a firm that did a lot of large projects in the Texas area. They were a well-respected firm, and this was one of their projects. This was the convention center in Waco, and I think this was 1971. They were doing large projects, as you can see, and in the modern vein. This is the Texas Life Insurance Company in Austin, a 10-story building that they finished in 1972. And again, this is Bennett, Carnahan, Hearn, and Thomas. Precast concrete panels, probably considered neo-formalism, and often they had these low horizontal structures beside them, and that typically housed the parking structure. And this also had tinted glass, which we do have at the Montana Life Insurance Company building. And here they are at the groundbreaking. I mentioned this, and then this is in June 1975. Oh, no, that's actually not right. It must be, it's 1974 because they opened in 1975. There's the rendering of the building right there behind them. The guy on the right is part of the Chamber of Commerce, as is Robert Bennett of Bennett, Carnahan, Hearn, and Thomas. This is how architects get to know potential clients, just to give you some advice there. And does this look familiar? This is the June 1975 ribbon cutting photograph. And here's a direct comparison between the two of them. They're both 11 bays wide. They have different settings and different climates, Herb had gone down to Waco, Texas, and the firm agreed to give him the drawings and have him build another one of these up in Bozeman. And so you can see the vast similarity between them. Richard Shanahan, who was the architect of record here in Bozeman, said he got the drawings from them, and this is what they built, exactly like they had built it in Texas, regardless of climate, temperature, soil conditions. So all kind of interesting there. I guess it's a way to save some design fees. But many thanks to Dick Shanahan for providing information about his experience with that. Also to Stuart Kelly, the owner of the building now, the Waco Savings and Loan Building, and to Keith Bailey, who's an architect in Waco, who was able to identify the architect for me. So the interior of these buildings is often where you get a lot of warmth. And so don't think of every modern building as being a cold building. This is a beautiful warm interior with a lobby. This is our Life of Montana building now, with a lobby that bifurcates, that bisects the building from north to south. So we're looking to the north right now, and behind us is the south. It's a direct connection between, and so it's a full balcony, full open space, very flexible space, which is what we like in modern buildings. And you can imagine they easily could have had a lot of desk and spatial dividers within this space to be able to accommodate a larger work crew. And these spaces are often more important than the form. It's the space that it provides. These are Jim Dolan's Eagles here that were there from the very beginning, not unlike a government building where you have like 1% for art. So it's really neat to see that they're still there. And you can see this warmth of the wood. You can see the paneling at the edge of the balcony where you can see some of the grain. And that's the whole idea, to be able to, that's part of the decoration, is to see the grain of the wood. And these wooden screens that flank the entryway and quarry tile, that they often used a lot of traditional materials, particularly when they were looking for durability, and quarry tile for the flooring is incredibly durable. And here's a close-up of the wood screen. You can see that's wonderful detail, and you just want to kind of touch it as you do. You really want to stroke this exterior aggregate and the fluting of the concrete, precast concrete on the exterior of the building. So that's where you get detail. And this is the second floor. You can see that balcony goes all the way around. And so it's all very encompassing and very connecting and transparent as well, which you can actually read a little better. Am I doing this again? I can't believe it. Ugh. You can read it a little better in the Waco interior. This is a much better lit building. You can actually see, if you go back, where were we? There are very few lights on the ceiling at the Life of Montana, but look how wonderful it is in Waco, because actually it really helped to have that space illuminated. And you can see that they have used the lobby there. They've got the counters for the banking, and they do have office space in there as well. And you can read this incredible transparency between the exterior and the interior. You can really read the outside, and you can see the trees there. Obviously, we'll have a different view in ours, but I tried to capture that with the photo on the left is the Life of Montana building, and the photo on the right is the Waco Savings and Loan building. And you can read that beautiful columnar structure on that flared column capital. It's just really quite striking. And that transparency is what they were aiming for. And this was the opening of a new home for your money in Waco in 1975 for their opening, and not dissimilar to our grand opening here in 1980 for the Life of Montana building. And there's a lot of boasting going on here. It's really great. You'll be interested to see that the Life of Montana building was the largest solar heated building in the Northwest. And the Life of Montana was the largest life insurance company domiciled in Montana. So there's a lot of pride, and you can see why. And here are the solar panels. This is a great view from the 1980 opening. They had a number of articles about the opening. And this was the largest collection in the Northwest. You know, this is still fairly early, and you know, they actually got they got a grant in 1978. The Life of Montana company was one of 83 successful national applicants of 450 entries to receive money from the Department of Energy for experimental solar heat. They received a $208,000 grant from the feds. This was supplemented by a $59,500 grant from Montana's Department of Natural Resources. And this was actually a reduction from the original amount. There was a little bit of controversy here. People felt that the Life of Montana building was being given this grant not rightly, partly because Herb Richards was a good friend of Governor Tom Judge. They felt that there was a little bit of patronage going on here, and that really wasn't appropriate. They also felt that the building wasn't designed for Montana, and it wasn't designed for the energy efficiency requirements that Montana would have. So why should they get so much money? So they reduced the money to $59,500. And the Attorney General was actually asked to investigate this. There was no outcome to that investigation, but it seems that there was a lot of controversy following Herb Richards around. Poor man. But the Life of Montana did put $64,000 of their own money into this, and did say that they had to spend more money on the heating system than they had intended in order to accommodate the panels. And the estimated 45-year payback is coming up in 2025. I don't know, however, if these panels are used at this point in time. And I've reached out to the current owner, who understandably has some privacy issues. But when they opened on January 14th, 1980, the sun did not shine. So apparently the system gurgled and spit. Everybody, I think the people that had thought, oh, this never would work in Montana and the building wasn't designed for it, they were probably just, you know, cheering to no end. But later on, the system went on to perform incredibly well. And it, the highest monthly bill in December of 1979, you know, cold time of year, right, was $688, when they had anticipated this is for the entire building. They had anticipated the bill to be $3,200. They thought that the system would cover 30% of the heating load. It ended up covering 70 to 80% of the heating load of the building. The Department of Energy said, this is one of the best demonstration projects we have in the country. And the engineer, he was stunned. He said, this is not what I expected. Didn't expect it to perform so well. So that's all quite exciting. And there the panels are still there, they're still intact. As I said, I don't know if they're using them. But the bragging rights that I just mentioned, as seen in the grand opening ad, they did not last long. The company was up against the deep recession of the 1980s and the typical insurance mergers, acquisitions, and purchases that had made Life of Montana such a large company in Montana, made them vulnerable to purchase by other larger buildings. So in 1983, Life of Montana was swallowed up by a bigger fish, the American Plan Corporation, based in Texas and New York. And here's Herb in his grandeur in 1983 saying this is a good thing, because what this purchase means is that they'll be able to double. You can see the insurance firm's jobs may double. He anticipated that within 2 years they would double the number of employees in Bozeman from 45 to 90. So he really felt this would be a great thing for Montana and for the Life of Montana Insurance Company building. Insurance company. And he would remain president after selling his $2.7 million in controlling interest to American Plan. But in 1984, he resigned for health reasons, and unfortunately, ultimately, a liquidation sale came to be. American Plan Corporation began selling off assets in early 1984, so not even a year after they'd purchased the company. They needed to sell off assets to cover a $1.6 million backlog of insurance policy payments. They were hoping that that sale would help them launch new projects that would keep them solvent. And that, unfortunately, that tactic wasn't successful, nor were other companies' attempts to purchase American Plan. So ultimately, the state and the courts judged that American Plan could no longer meet their financial obligations. In 1987, the company was placed into rehab, and the state has an insurance commission that was in charge of all this and dealing with these resolutions that essentially the company needed to liquidate. So in 1988, the court deemed that American Plan was insolvent by nearly $24 million, and they ordered it liquidated. Hill County, a firm in Texas, took over the last 12,000 insurance policies that needed to be still processed, and the Hill County specialized in taking over policies just like this. So apparently, bankrupt life insurance companies was not an uncommon thing at all. The liquidation sale was August 16th, 1989, and the company was formally dissolved on December 3rd, 1990. Note that Waco Savings and Loan also went through a number of mergers, consolidations, and as I said earlier, is no longer Waco Savings and Loan. And as early as 1982, Waco Savings and Loan was no longer that, it was a different company. So where are we today? Having trouble with the buttons again. I really just have one more slide. Let's see if we go back, can we? Okay. All right, I'm gonna do that whole crazy thing again.
Do the crazy thing again, Leslie, and let's see what happens.
All right, well, all it was, really, I only have one last slide, so we'll just skip it. But what it is, the building is owned by a businessman in Billings, and it does have renters, 2 renters that has a best practice, which I looked up. They're fascinating. They've won awards for being a small business that are helping businesses have better practices in terms of medicine, and teaching CPR, teaching Bozeman Health different ways of practicing medicine. And a law firm is on the west half, and they're actually redoing their offices right now, and best practices on the east half. So the building is being used, and it has proven to be fairly flexible in terms of how it's been used. And it's still there on the hill, and it still has a Life of Montana sign, I think that's very appropriate. I would like to thank Herb Richards. I have never had a chance to speak with him, but I think that he brought us a phenomenal building that we all really treasure. And the fact that it has a twin in Waco, Texas is really kind of cool. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Right. Thanks, Leslie. That was so fascinating. And we have a couple of questions already, but if anyone has a question for Leslie, again, the chat box, the chat icon is just in the bottom bar. And you just click on that, and then you can just type in your question. So our first question was from Scott Carpenter, and he's asking, it's so nice to see Scott on here, all the way from maybe California, I'm not sure. But Scott is asking, kind of going back to the slide with the building that was on the lot that is now a parking lot on Black Street.
Yeah.
Are the concrete steps the same that are still at the mound to the Black Street parking lot?
I don't know. I'm so sorry.
I told Scott, yes, the steps are the same and are still there. But I was thinking about it, and I know last summer they were there, but I haven't gone by it this summer because I know there was some construction happening there, so they might not still be there. But as of last summer, they were the same steps and they were still there.
Okay. Tell you what, Scott, I'll go visit it and take a look at it and let you know. That's a great question. Who my husband thinks I over-prepare for these things. I never could have prepared for that question, but I love it. I will find out.
Okay, so we have another question from Becca. Becca Shields asks, it seems the firm went to extensive lengths to keep a building in Bozeman. Is there anything in particular that kept them here rather than just moving to Billings?
Well, I think it was that Herb lived here, and he had been here since 1953. And he did not grow up here. He grew up in Michigan and then was in Idaho. But I think he had a strong connection with Bozeman. And he does still have colleagues and friends here in Bozeman. I think he also knew how to work Bozeman's political system quite well. He had a lawyer that helped him navigate that whole city process. But when he threatens to move the company to Billings, I think he really didn't want to do that. But I think if he had to, he would have. But I think it's just because he lived here. And, he lived at 415 South Wilson in the house that Delaney lives in now, that lovely revival building.
Nice.
So he had a pretty good gig here, right? Why would you go?
He had a good spot in town, that's for sure.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Okay. As a non-Montana, and this is from Jennifer Gilmore.
Oh, no.
Jennifer.
Oh, great.
So she says, as a non-Montanan and a non-architect, I have to say I was very surprised to be so entertained with all this wonderful information. Well done. Thank you.
Oh, now you can tell by the last name that there's a little family connection there.
Right.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for watching. Did Bob tell you?
So I had a question, Leslie. When did the J.C. Billion building, the spaceship as we like to call it, what year did they tear that down? I'm trying to remember.
So that, time goes by too fast. Was it 3 years ago? They've built all that. They've got all, it had to have been more than 3 years ago, because I think that, oh gosh, I can't even think of the names of those stores that are there now. They must have been
like CVS and
yeah, CVS and the like a Panda Box or whatever in the not a Qdoba, but I think it must have come down 5 years ago. It was here when Diana Painter did her survey on modernism in Montana. Actually, that was probably 10 years ago.
Scott Carpenter says 2012. So that's probably about
okay.
2012. Yep. Thanks, Scott.
8 years ago. Oh.
Yeah. Seems like it just went down yesterday. So Adrian asked, is there a relationship between this building and the Lewis and Clark Hotel? Similar architecture? That's a good question.
I love that question. And there is no specific direct relation. The Lewis and Clark Motel is an interesting sorry, I should pull up my notes because I'm doing some research on it right now. It was designed in a similar time frame. It was like 1977, 78. So he usually could have been looking at the Life of Montana building, thinking about that. And it was, I'm drawing a blank on the man's name. Lisa's built by Lisa's dad. And he designed it and built it himself, and he was very proud of the fact that he was not an architect, but that he performed as an architect on his building. And but it's a very similar time period. Unfortunately, a sweet little motel court series of buildings came down to build the Lewis and Clark Motel.
Was that kind of a motel? Was that a motel that was there before?
Yeah, it was called an auto court, and they actually had little. If you look at the Sanborn maps, they had little like a garage, and then the unit, and a garage, and then the unit. It's not dissimilar to one that's up in. Oh, shoot. Where does oh God.
You're on the spot.
Where does the guy who used to Dave Letterman? Where's Dave Letterman live? It's in that town. It's a
I have no idea.
It's in Teton County. It's Shoto. He lives in Shoto. Thank you. Oh my God. But you can see, I mean, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked it, because very similar, you know, in terms of a very heavy projecting roof line, you know, flat roof line, and you know, you can really read the structure, and it has precast concrete, and you all ought to get into the Lewis and Clark Motel, because he built a phenomenal pool in there that's just lovely. Yeah.
So Leslie, maybe you can explain for those folks who aren't architects or historians what Sanborn maps are.
Oh, I'm happy to do that. Sanborn fire insurance maps. And we have them in Bozeman from like 1884 through 1947 or 43, something like that. And they started in the 1870s nationally, and went through the 1970s. And some towns have more or less of them. But the whole rationale behind them was insurance companies needed to insure buildings, right? So they needed to know how flammable they might be. So they sent Sanborn teams out to towns all throughout the states on behalf of insurance companies to ascertain. I mean, they would look at the building that was on North Black, and they would indicate whether it was a frame structure, you know, what size it was. They would draw an outline of the building, whether it was 2 stories, 1 stories. Was it brick? Was it stone? Did it have flammable liquids, or, you know, like tanks or gas in it? So if it was a gas station, it might have a greater chance of burning, right? And if it had wood structure as opposed to steel or concrete, then you have different levels of flammability. And so they went all across, and we have great resources with that, because then you can see the footprint of the building and say 1884. And then in 1890 and see that, oh, an addition was added onto it. And they changed the shape of the front porch, and they put a different roof on it, because roofing was also something they were very concerned about. If it had wood shingles, you know, it could burn more easily than an asphalt roof. And so it was a great way to document buildings sequentially, how they evolved. It's a bit of a skip, because you have you go from 1884 to 1890 to 1891 to 1904 to 1912. So sometimes you'll see people say, oh, well, that happened between 1904 and 1912, because they're looking at the Sanborn maps. Is that enough of an explanation?
Yeah. I think so.
I think you should read was it Jane Hamilton? Was that her name? Who wrote Widow Nash? She has a Sanborn team. It wasn't Jane Hamilton.
Jamie Harrison.
Jamie Harrison of Livingston writes this great book that has a Sanborn team come to town, and that they're, you know, in a novel, and they actually talk about them.
Yeah,
it's pretty delightful. Oh, but so actually, I'll go back to the original ones were colored, and so if it were stone, it would be yellow, and if it were a brick, it would be pink. And so you could graphically, and these are large books, like 18 by 24, and you could fold them open, and there's some original ones of these at the Gallatin History Museum. When you fold them open, you can graphically have a very quick understanding of just how flammable this part of town might be. And now they're accessible online in black and white. Oh, well, there are a few that are in color, and they're getting more and more of those out, which is very helpful because you can tell a few more things on the color versions than the black and white ones, because you rely on some shading that you might or might not be interpreting correctly. But they're accessible online, and Crystal can probably get you access to that on the website.
Right. Okay, let me see. I think that might be all the questions, Leslie. Let me just look through here and make sure I got them all. If anyone has any more questions, you can just put it in. You're getting a lot of. Jane Bunting says you did a great job. Thanks for the information. Ivy Marriott says very interesting. I've always wondered about the building. Thank you, Leslie. Oh, the name of the novel, Jane, is The Widow Nash. Nash, The Widow Nash. And Jamie Harrison wrote the novel, and it's set in Livingston to a certain degree. It's a great novel. It's one of my favorite books. And Leslie read it because I told her to read it because there was these Sanborn men that were in it. So maybe we should add that one to our book club. So we started a book club. Yeah, Extreme History Book Club. We'll add that one to it. All right, so thank you so much, Leslie. That was wonderful. And thank you for being our guinea pig on our Zoom lecture series. Our virtual
Happy to do it. Happy to stand in the middle of I-90 for the Extreme History Project.
She'll do anything for extreme history. And thanks to all of you out there in the crowd. And hopefully we'll all be back together at the Museum of the Rockies here in the fall, or in a few months anyway. So thanks, everyone, and have a good night. And good night, everybody. Good night, Scott. Scott says, great job, Leslie and Crystal. Jennifer says, very interesting. Becca, we're going to Zoom our future lectures.
Yes, Crystal, everyone can see that.
Cheryl said that.
Yep.
Becca, cool. All right, everyone, will have a good evening. And we are recording this, so we're going to put it on our YouTube page. So just Google Extreme History Project YouTube page if you want to send it to a friend or watch it again. And we'll also put that out in an email. Probably our newsletter coming up will have a link to this in it, so you can pass it on to friends and family members, Leslie.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all.
All right. Thanks,
So
everyone.
I stopped sharing, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, you can stop sharing and